thanks for being interested. I assume everyone is here because you're maybe if not interested fully in a career in journalism or TV or media, at least want to know more about it, which is totally fair. And I'm here to try to be as transparent about it as possible. The good, the bad, the fun, the interesting, the tough, and any other questions that you may have in between. I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up in Coney Island. My parents immigrated here from Russia before I was born. They came because they wanted, among other things, freedom of the press and freedom of religion. My mom was actually a reporter too. She was a entertainment reporter who used to travel, be one of the few people allowed out of the country to travel for film festivals and things like that, and then realized that it was a much harder life than she had thought, and that she didn't really have the kind of freedom that she wanted. So she came here, but there was a huge language barrier, and she decided to pursue a career in another field. But I think because of her story, I was really interested in that career from a really young age. I don't know how old most of you guys are, but I grew up, I was in like 3rd grade during 9/11, and I remember the couple of weeks after that, I as an 8-year-old kid was glued to the TV, just terrified. And one of the things that did bring me a little bit of comfort was just knowing, like having an idea of what's happening, having an idea of what unfolding investigations looked like, and hearing some of the stories of, unfortunately, the people who died, but also the people who were heroes and the people who were doing everything they can to help save people. So I guess since then, I studied in public school. I went to Edward R. Murrow High School here in Brooklyn, and then for college, my first 2 years I spent at CUNY at Hunter College. They had a media studies program, which I really liked, but I wanted specifically to focus on TV journalism. So I transferred over to NYU, and I took my major. They needed a major that was not just journalism, but also another field that would be helpful with journalism. For example, statistics are usually helpful with journalism. Politics is usually helpful with journalism. History, often helpful with journalism. Some kind of field that would help you find maybe a niche or help you really develop some skills that would be relevant to you as a journalist. So my major was journalism and politics, and I knew that I wanted to do journalism that had to do with broadcast TV, digital media, because that was the future, right? People weren't really reading news articles on paper anymore. And so my first job out of college was not exactly journalism, but it really taught me a lot. I was an associate producer at the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. That's a TV station, by the way. I think it's on Channel 21. It's called NYC Life. They produce all kinds of really cool documentaries about like the history of New York City and fun things to do in New York City on a budget, and some of the most iconic architecture in New York City, things like that. I worked there, A, as an intern, and then B, once I graduated. And then after I spent a year there, I went over to News 12, Brooklyn. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it's like the local cable station, covers pretty much only Brooklyn. And I started as a producer, actually. I was not a reporter, although I wanted to be. I started behind the scenes, and what a producer basically does in news is basically writes the whole show. So you're deciding as a producer what the top story of your newscast is, and then you're stacking that story. So you want to make sure that the newscast has a good flow, that you're not jumping from like a horrible crime story to a funny, strange, quirky story, because that is an uncomfortable jump and it doesn't flow well. So you're really kind of timing out the show and writing it beginning to end. And that makes you a good reporter too. So with time, I eventually started reporting on camera, and then I became an investigative reporter there, then I became an anchor there, and then finally after 6 years, I moved on last year to CBS New York, and that's where I am now. So just wanted to give you an idea. I have a couple of clips that I pulled up on the screen just to show you the variety of stories. I'm a general assignment reporter and I cover mostly Brooklyn, but this is the kind of business where it's really true, like no 2 days are alike. You could start your day off on a very happy, sweet, interesting story about some community event, and then there will be a fatal fire, and you'll have to pivot and run to that, and that'll be breaking news. So I have a couple of clips up here. One of them is exactly what happened. I was working on an interesting, fun story about this really cool internship program at Greenwood Cemetery, and then suddenly there was a fatal fire, and we had to pivot to that. So this is a sad story.
It's being investigated as suspicious.
The fire broke out early this morning in a home in East New York, Brooklyn. 2 people have died. CBS 2's Hannah Kliger live in East New York now, where she's been talking to residents all afternoon. Hannah.
Yeah, one of the most disturbing parts of this investigation, Maurice and Christine, is that police are deeming it suspicious. Of course, very sparse details on that at this point, but we do know it claimed the lives of at least 2 people, including a 36-year-old woman and 17-year-old girl, according to officials who also say 4 other people who were living inside this house, including those 3 children, are in the hospital.
I'm going to try to save us some time. You get the idea. Goes from a sweet, easy story that teaches people about the community to suddenly a massive tragedy that affected a completely different community and really broke people's hearts. This was a really hard one to tell because it then turned out that I think several other people died in this fire, and it was just really difficult to do. But that's one example of where where a typical day in news can take you. I'll show you another example, something a little bit more community-oriented. Just to give you some context, this was last year in June. This was a story that I shot and filmed completely by myself, pitched it, found this idea, and kind of decided. We cover a lot of Pride-related stories in June. It's Pride Month, and it's a huge community in our city. But a lot of there are these very organized kind of events, and I wanted to find something that was a little bit different and away from the beaten path. And so I found this group that was obsessed with the Gowanus Canal. I don't know if you guys know, but the Gowanus Canal is like one of the dirtiest waterways in New York City. But these people really love to spend their time exploring this canal that's undergoing a Superfund cleanup. And one of the things they did, because they're obsessed with the canal, is they held a pride paddle on the Gowanus Canal. So it was just like interesting story, also kind of environmental, and also just a story about like waterfronts and how like this group of queer people kind of found a connection with this waterfront in a unique way.
Pride Month wrapping up, but many continue to look for unique ways to commemorate LGBTQ history in the city.
CBS 2's Hannah Kliger takes us to Gowanus to show us how a group is recognizing the history of Brooklyn's waterfront.
The beauty of the Gowanus Canal is in the eye of the beholder. Some would say that's because you never know what you're going to find.
You might see a dead rat. You might see a living dolphin.
This week, we found 20 canoers flying pride flags in the water. The Gowanus Dredgers Canoe Club hosted their 4th annual Pride Paddle this week in the notoriously nicknamed Lavender Lake.
I love like alternative pride events that are not like clubbing or drinking related.
Captain Brad Vogel says the Superfund site resonates with some in the queer community.
The story of being marginalized and forgotten or actively abused.
We saw some of the things you'd expect to see. Litter, debris, strange colors on the surface.
The sediment is gross and disgusting and is really bad, but if you don't poke it, it'll leave you alone.
But for many here,
You're going into the dredger's nibble.
the Gowanus also provides a sense of peace.
It's really valuable to me to find ways to kind of ground and actually feel connected to our planet.
Because of all the dredging and cleanup that's happening in the most polluted part of the canal, right now we're staying more towards the mouth of the canal that opens into Gowanus Bay. And as this bay opens and the sun sets, the water is starting to get a lot clearer.
It's incredibly vibrant. It is so full of life.
Signs of nature all around. Birds, plants growing in tires, mulberry trees on the banks. Organizers say this was their biggest turnout ever. According to them, the Gowanus was always kind of queer.
You've long had this history in New York City especially of people who didn't quite fit in finding a place to fit in at the waterfront.
The city seems quieter on the water, but you'll never really forget you're in New York. In Gowanus, Brooklyn, Hannah Kliger, CBS 2 News.
You never know in this city where you're going to find some beauty.
No.
That's unique.
Of all places.
That's amazing. Great story.
So you can see the tone there a little bit different, right? It's a more lighthearted story, a little bit more slow-paced, a little bit more centered around beauty shots and kind of quirky, interesting things people say. Not maybe your typical news story, like if there's breaking news, that would be the first story to go, unfortunately, but just to show you the variety of stories that you could be doing any given day. I want to show you one last clip, just because if you're really actively trying to get into this business, you need to have a reel. A reel is basically a portfolio, a video portfolio, a collection of your best work. You don't have to work at a news station to build a reel, by the way. You could go outside with a camera and a microphone, and you can find something in the community that people care about, and you can shoot a couple of stand-ups yourself. And this is what you would use to submit to news stations across the country to get a job in the business. So I'm going to show you my reel. This was pieces that I took from stories that I had done at News 12 and used it, put it together to get my job at CBS. So this is exactly what I applied with to get this job. Just an idea of the layout of a reel, because my reel is like 9 minutes long. I'm not going to show you all of it so we can save time for questions, but the way that a news reel is typically structured is you have a couple of clips of so-called stand-ups, which is you on camera reporting from any given scene. 10-second stand-ups, a collection of them, first 2 minutes is just you on camera, so that your news director, the person who's making that hiring decision, will see like what your on-camera presence is like. What do you sound like? How do you write? Like, because everything that you're saying on camera, you're writing it beforehand. So how do you write? Is your writing and your reporting easy to understand? Is it conversational? Are you good at demonstrating what's behind you? You're not just like a talking head. You have to show what's happening. That's the first like minute or two of your reel. And then you have 3 actual full stories, some of your strongest work that you've done. So I'm not going to show you the 3 full stories because, again, it's like 9 minutes long, but I'll show you the first 2 minutes, which is the most important part, which is what's really getting the attention of your news director. So this I made last year when I was looking to apply to CBS.
The bus driver kept on driving to get his passengers out of harm's way, only to realize about a block later that someone on his bus was injured. As it turns out, Atonia Lewis is not the only victim of this bait and switch.
As we started digging deeper, speaking to the landlord, prosecutors, and police, we found other victims, several others, each of them hoping to live here, but instead losing thousands of dollars.
Finally, after hours of water gushing from that broken main, you can see that water has been turned off. The Department of Environmental Protection says this all started because a private contractor operating a drill hit that water main, and this was the result. It took hours, apparently, of shoveling, of excavating, and digging, but it was all inspired, as you're about to hear, by a father's love for his daughter.
It's very low-lying and it's susceptible to flooding, and they weren't kidding. The rain has almost reached the edge of the curb, so that's several inches there that you can see.
Tomorrow morning, all of this fun ends, and the difficulty of planning and building for Thanksgiving starts. As for what's next, I want to show you here, the Department of Buildings is at the scene. They are currently investigating to make sure. A spokesperson says they're looking into whether the rest of this building here is stable. On one side, a Zionist group of community leaders who came out in support of the 2 young boys who were attacked, and directly across the street from them, a counter-protest organized by an anti-Zionist Jewish group that supports Palestine. A salsa party on the boardwalk is just what the doctor ordered, and you know what? I'm there with them in Coney Island in Brooklyn. Hannah Kliger, News 12.
Okay, so like big range of stories, right? We got a collapse, we got a scam, we got a protest, we got a salsa party. and that's what you want to show. You want to show a range of topics that you can report on. And like the most kind of snappy, we got crime, like, and that's what you want in a reel. You want to show them that you have variety and you can report on any topic that they throw at you, because you will be reporting on any topic. It could be like a really dense financial story. It could be a really complicated lawsuit. It could be a really bizarre crime scene. So that's kind of, and just wanted to give you an idea of what a typical day is. There's no such thing, but that's kind of what it is. Happy to take some questions. Yeah.
My first question is, what is with the Jews anti-Semitism? It's the first time I hear such a thing. To support the
It was just that story that, you know, people were really passionate. There were this group of people. Just to give you some context, there was some young people who were attacked, and the investigation into this attack, people believed that it was anti-Semitic, and a group was like, well, I don't remember the context. It was a couple of years ago, but yeah, there was a group that was attacked. I mean, the point of the story is kind of, you have to show both sides. That was really the point of demonstrating that. This was a protest, and then there was a counter-protest, and both sides deserve the coverage for both of their opinions. That was the point of demonstrating that. Questions? Yes?
Kalia, my question is, when you get on like a breaking news scene, do you still write on that scene?
Yes.
So you take like 10 minutes to write something?
So the way it usually works is, and there was a clip in the reel where you can see I was kind of, it was very unscripted. I was like, the Department of Buildings, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't like a beautifully written sentence. It was super breaking news. We had just gotten there, and we just had some very basic information that a house had collapsed. We didn't know why. We didn't know what caused it. But the only thing you can report is what you do know. So what you see, what you're seeing on the scene, what officials are telling you. So when we get to breaking news, we try to gather as much information as we can. Maybe it's not going to be the most beautifully written story, but yes, anytime we get somewhere, at the very least, we're writing an outline of what we're going to say. We send it to our executive producer, or we send it to our news director or our manager, who reads through kind of the information, the facts that we have, and approves it, and then we're ready to go on the air. Yes?
And also follow up, do you like read, does someone hold the script behind you, or
No.
do you read?
You memorize it. You don't have to memorize the whole thing. What you really need to memorize is the first couple of sentences, because usually what happens in a live news story is, and you saw that with the first story that I shared, which the anchor tosses to you and says, CBS 2's Hannah Kliger is there in East New York with the latest on the investigation. And I'm going to say the top two sentences of my story are going to be the latest on that investigation. We're now learning that this investigation, police say, is suspicious. And here's what we know. And then I have notes. So I have written down notes that I got from the scene. Spoke with police, I spoke with FDNY, I spoke with the Department of Buildings, I spoke with neighbors, and I spent the entire day collecting all of this information, and I have notes. And I also, I sent back video. So you saw I wasn't on camera the whole time. There was video that was covering parts, and that's the time I could look down at my notes to make sure I get everything right. So I'm not on camera the whole time. If they need me to be, if we had no video, I would be, and I could be, and it's okay to look down and just clarify or make sure that you're saying something correctly. But most of the time, the parts of the story that you're memorizing are maybe the first two sentences and the last two sentences. When you go back on camera and you say, you know, this is still an active investigation. We're going to learn more about this fire in the coming days. We're live in East New York, Hannah Kliger, CBS 2 News. Send it back to you. So we're memorizing it. There's no prompter, not out in the field, but you're not just like staring into a camera and speaking the whole time. That's a terrifying thought. Like, I would hate to do that. Most of the time it's not like that. And even if you're thrown in a situation like that, remember, you've spent all day investigating this story. So by the end of the day, like, if there's one person who knows this story better than anyone in the newsroom, it's going to be you. You spent the entire day out at this fire. You know exactly how many people were killed, or at least like what information police are giving you. So you're familiar with it. Like pretend, think about if you're writing an article on a very specific topic, like you'll know a lot of things about that topic. So you could, with confidence, speak about it for a minute. Good question. More questions? Yes.
What made you decide to become a reporter? Is it because of your mom?
I think so. I wanted, yes, definitely in part about my mom, which is why I kind of mentioned it when I was telling you about myself. I think the other part of it was that experience of like feeling a little bit of solace in watching like what was happening during 9/11, because again, like even though it was such a scary time, to me at least, knowing felt better than not knowing, or just like seeing smoke and not knowing what was happening. So just like shining a light on information and being the person who brings that information was something I was interested in. I also wanted a career where I could do something that was different every day, that I didn't necessarily have to, like sit in an office every single day and kind of just wanted something that's a little different. And this is prime example of that. Like you're not ever sitting in an office doing the same thing every day. Yes?
I have a question. You mentioned that you actually shot and edited one of those stories, right, yourself?
Yeah.
So my question is, what is the typical team at CBS right now?
Right.
Like, do you work with the same camera operator, or do you edit the story yourself? Do you use like a software, like on the technical side of it? Do you have to be familiar with that? How it works today?
I love that question, because it's like, this answer is going to be kind of complicated, but I love the question because it's so important about what this business is. And I was hoping someone would ask that question. My role, I would say maybe 70% of the time, and this is specifically like at CBS, it's me and maybe 2 other reporters that we're almost always shooting our own stuff. So except for that fire, except for really big breaking news, except for when I'm live, all of my like pre-recorded, written, edited stories are stories I've shot myself. So there is no camera operator, there is no editor. It's me, my 2 cameras that I carry around, and my laptop. In terms of editing, I edit on Adobe Premiere. It's pretty standard across the business, that or Final Cut. Some people use, what's that other one? Yeah, that's right. But I'm pretty sure most newsrooms use Premiere. But there's a caveat to that. At CBS, if I'm going to a breaking news story, if I'm going to a live shot, if I'm going to like a really big event where it's just not fair to send me by myself, like, I don't know, like July 4th, the hot dog eating contest, that's a big story. There's gonna be like 1 million people there. There's no way that I can drag a camera around and try to get all the elements and then go live. I mean, it's just not. So yeah, usually if that's the case, they'll send me with a crew. The crew is usually a camera operator and a second person, also usually a camera operator, just to work as a second set of hands. Because there's like a lot of technical things that go into going live. You got to connect to like something that'll broadcast the signal, so it's more complicated than that. That being said, that is something that at the big markets here in New York City and like in California, like the top few markets, you are going to be working with cameramen, photographers a lot. At the smaller markets, if you're, for example, your first job is in Arkansas or Washington State, just like smaller markets, you're going to be doing a lot of things by yourself. And so you have to really like to edit. You have to really like to play with cameras to try to get creative. At News 12, also, almost everything except for live shots and breaking news were shot by the reporters themselves. So there's the new kind of role that it's called across the nation. It's not just TV reporter, it's called MMJ, which is multimedia journalist, which means you're doing everything. You're writing the script, you're shooting the stories, you're doing the interviews, you're cutting the video, editing it together, and then sometimes you're even writing the web article that goes on the website. Great question. Other questions?
I had a question from the fashion department. Anybody in here from the fashion department? Okay, so they wanted to know, the questions were, do you have a stylist? Do you have a clothing budget? Everything about fashion.
Yeah.
And I could report back to them about what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a stylist?
So no, we do have consultants that come in every couple of months and just kind of look at your work and kind of tell you just kind of what would look better on camera, give you suggestions on how to style your hair. But no, there's no stylist that like comes in or dresses the reporters. The one thing that always is kind of standard in TV news, and you'll just find that like suddenly your entire closet becomes this is solid colored clothing. So like everything that I own is just this, except in every color of the rainbow. And that's because things that have really elaborate patterns are beautiful in real life. But if anyone's worked with a camera, they can appear really weird on camera sometimes. They'll give you like some weird staticking, or it'll bleed into weird colors. So almost always, the easiest, best way to dress is solid colors. You look better on camera, and it just kind of instantly gives off like a professional, clean vibe. In terms of budget, it depends. I did have a hair makeup budget, very small hair makeup budget at News 12, and it was just like, you know, the things that you need to do your own makeup. No one does your own makeup for you. When you start getting to like the network level, or like if you're like a really long time anchor at like a station, then you'll have a makeup artist. There'll be like a little makeup studio in the office. But yeah, it's usually just me and my curling iron most days. So, but yeah, good question, because people don't always understand why like news reporters all dress the same, and it's just because it just works and it just looks best on camera. Yes.
Has there been a story that you've reported on that has kind of like messed with you, like I don't know, like you know?
Yeah. I do, yeah. I appreciate the question, because yes, we're all people, right? So like anything that has to do with dead children, anything that has to do with like people who are already suffering and then like really getting hit with another tragedy is really, really sad. And the first while that you're in this business, it really does get to you. Because there's so much tragedy in this business, but there's also a lot of really good stories. The thing that's worked for me, to be honest, is as soon as I cross the threshold of my home, I turn off the news. Like I've had enough of it, and I focus on like my family and my spending time with the people I love. But yes, of course. When you're there, like I've been interviewing someone and they would start to cry, and I would start to cry because I can feel their pain. It's really, really, really hard. Or if someone's lost a loved one and you can really just like feel the sadness in their voice, and they're sharing with you like how this loved one really loved to play with their little sibling, or I mean, this is a person and this is a family, and it doesn't get easier talking about other people's tragedies.
I understand that situation as well. See, if someone else gets upset, you will too.
Yeah.
It's a pattern or a cycle.
Right, exactly. And it's okay to do that. Because again, like the whole point of telling these stories is to tell them in a very human way, and in a way that is respectful to whoever this person who was lost is. And the loss is sad, so it's okay to be sad. Right. Now, I wouldn't like, most people wouldn't tell you to like go on camera crying like while you're on camera, but it's okay to like with your voice convey sadness, that it's a very solemn moment, that this is a tragedy, you know, like that's okay, because it's objectively a tragedy. Like there's no second opinion about that, you know what I mean? Like this is very sad. So
whether you know the person or not.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember
back in March after St. Patrick's Week, when I heard breaking news, I mean, I was shaking
Yeah,
about the crime scene that happened in my community.
right. Yeah, it does that to
And
you.
the victim was the same age as I am,
Yeah, yeah. And
also a resident in my
of the
area.
community.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was being questioned, is there anybody that I know? I answered no simply.
Yeah.
Then again, who knows, because it was an unidentified person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
You just figure out identified people than the unknown ones.
Yeah. And even identifying, like, if,
Unidentified.
right, I know, but even like sometimes we'll learn the identity of someone before police will release that identity. We can't go on the air with that because we don't want this person's loved ones to learn, for example, from the news that their loved one died. Like that would be a horrible way to learn about that. So just almost like as a human thing, we don't identify people unless they've been identified and the family has been notified. But yeah, that's always, those stories are always really disturbing. And unfortunately, you'll get a lot of that in this business too. You'll get a lot of very heartbreaking stories, sometimes disturbing ones too. The one thing that, yes, did you have a question? No, I was gonna say the one thing that people do ask sometimes is how exposed we are to like death itself, like seeing it. Not very often. We usually arrive at like a breaking news scene, you know, as it's at, you know, I've never arrived at a scene and seen like a dead body or anything like that. So if that's something that really would disturb people, and it should, that's not something that we usually have to deal with.
When it comes to like reporting and the whole process of it, and you making that thing, like I'm very big on doing what you love, because when you do it, you feel like you won't have fun, you won't feel like you're going to work just to go to work. Oh, I don't want to do this, you know, you won't have that feeling. So when you do this, do you feel like that when it comes to this, despite all the negative things that would happen? And if you do, what's your favorite part of this business?
That's a great question. I would say on the most part, yes. There are days, just like I think with any job, that you kind of get caught up in the weeds a little bit. Like if it's a really complicated story and you're just like on a really tight deadline and you need to tell this story in a fair and balanced and informative way, and it's just really hard and everything is going wrong. There are days where I just, but yeah, no, I'm very happy with this career. It's not for everyone. It's not, you know, it's not for someone if you just want to be on TV. There's a lot more to it than that, and most of the time, like that'll be the last thing you think about. The writing or the editing, the gathering of the story will be the top of the priority. But yeah, I do when I'm out there and I'm shooting video or I'm at breaking news. I'm doing what I love, which is talking to people who are, you know, going through a whole bunch of different things, happy things, scary things, sad things. Sometimes we're helping them if they were a victim of a scam. We're trying to get them answers, you know. So like I think that's probably my favorite part, is like seeing the actual effects of your journalism. So like, for example, a couple of weeks ago I did a story. It was a horrible story about raw sewage that's been leaking out of this NYCHA development for years, and every single effort that, you know, the tenant association president had made to get it resolved was completely ignored by NYCHA, and nobody bothered to come out and clean it. And then at the end of our story, like we learned that like NYCHA is now suddenly, after the story aired, going in and making all of these repairs to the plumbing work. And there's something about that that's like, well, finally this problem is being resolved. Like, why did they have to go to the news to get some kind of answer? But sometimes that's what it is. Like, I think my favorite part, in short, is seeing kind of the direct result of the journalism that you do sometimes. It's really rewarding. I had a colleague who did a story about someone who really needed, I think, a kidney donation. Someone who like really was like, I think, dying if they weren't going to get it. And someone saw the story and decided to donate their kidney, which is like direct result of the fact that this journalist came out and did a story. You know? Yes?
Yeah, so speaking about like people coming to the news, the producers and you since you're a reporter, how are you aware of any stories that are happening like if there's a fire, how are you aware of it?
Yeah.
How do you guys find out these stories?
That's a good question. And the answer is there's like a million different outlets for that. There are, if it's like a story involving like a city agency or some kind of big ribbon cutting, usually there's a so-called a media advisory that's sent out a couple of days before, so we put it on the calendar, and if we can make it, we'll make it. In terms of breaking news, there is a team that sits back at the broadcast center called the assignment desk, and they're listening to police scanners, they're listening to like fire department scanners, they're listening to, they're receiving notifications sometimes from the community. They'll call and they'll be like, hey, like I'm seeing a fire, I'm located right here, it's like across the street from my house. Also, FDNY and NYPD are pretty good about like even writing about it on Twitter. Like FDNY is responding to a 2-alarm fire in this location, 150 units are at the scene. And now we know like how big is this fire? If there are 2 fires happening at once, one is a 4-alarm, one is a 2-alarm, we're gonna go to the 4-alarm fire. That's gonna be the bigger story of the day. And a lot of it is just deciding like what the big story of the day is, because like a little fire in like a warehouse, an empty warehouse, like a small little fire that was contained in 15 minutes isn't really a story when you compare it to like, God forbid, a massive fire that really ripped apart someone's family or someone's home. So scanners, online calls, so-called media advisories. Sometimes a good story is like following back up on something that we did a month ago. Like, right now I'm looking into a story about this fatal fire that we covered in, I think it was Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where a mom was cooking and something went wrong at some point, and the mom and her 2 kids died. But now the point is like to go back into that building and to try to get some answers about like who this mom was, because there's an active campaign right now in the community to raise money for her funeral arrangements, and like her family is kind of sharing some photos, so just to go back and talk about who she was and how this could have happened. Sometimes that's a good story. There's a variety of places, but with breaking news, it's pretty easy. We typically, Citizen app also really good. It's kind of been a game changer the past couple of years. Now we don't rely on Citizen app for like our facts. Like if someone on Citizen app is writing that 2 people are dead, we would never take their word for it, like unless that information's coming from like a reliable agency, FDNY, NYPD, medical examiner's office. We're not going to take, but to know like what's happening and to see the live video, to know if we need to send a crew there, super helpful. And also I pitch a lot of my own stories. So like if I know that, I don't know, May is Asian American Pacific Islander Month, and I know that this is a story I literally did this week. There's a massive election in a new city council district that was redistricted here in Brooklyn specifically to create an Asian American majority for the first time in Brooklyn's history. That's a huge AAPI story, and all of the candidates that are running, except for one, are Asian. That's a really big story, and that's a story that, we don't need someone to give us information on breaking news. Like being in the community, covering this community, that this is happening. Yeah, that's a good question. Other questions?
Could you tell us about your schooling? So what degree did you obtain, and maybe how did you get your first job out of school?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I went to, first 2 years I spent at Hunter, and I did a lot of my prerequisites there, which I was really happy with the way that turned out, because then I went to NYU, and NYU is really expensive. Yes.
What was your major?
At NYU?
Yeah.
At Hunter, I was media studies. I think at the time they had like a kind of a more generic media studies major, but then I transferred to NYU, and they have a specific like school of journalism, the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute, and they have a really good journalism program. And so my major there was broadcast journalism and politics. The one thing I would say, if you're interested in this business, is like just really try to load up on the internships. Any internship, any foot in any door that you can get is gold. Like it's free. I mean, I don't think they even do free internships anymore. I feel like.
They're moving away.
Yeah, they're moving away from that.
Because they want people to get paid.
Yes. While I was there, that was not a thing. Like every internship was free, which is, my first internship was, again, at the mayor's office of media and entertainment. And the reason I bring it up is because literally your internships will be your first foot in any door. Because that was my first job after college. Like what happened was I was an intern there. I was doing anything they told me to. Like I would put a garbage bag on and go spray paint cardboard boxes because they needed it for a shoot that they were doing. Like it was just anything, but you're getting your hands dirty doing this stuff. You're like really just kind of, it's as hands-on as you can get. I also interned at New York One, which was good, just like following a reporter around. Even if I, wasn't actively like involved in the newsroom in a way that I would have wanted to, just following them around and seeing what their day is like really helped me. So internships are worth their weight in gold. Now they're doing more paid ones, which is great. I think at the time there were lawsuits that were happening because the interns weren't getting paid and they also weren't really doing like work that teaches them about the business. They were kind of just running coffee for people, which is not fair, And then I worked at Morning Joe on MSNBC. That was an interesting one, but a tough one because I had to, as an intern, I had to be at work at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was like, you never knew who would walk through the doors. Like one day it was, Bill Gates, and I had to bring him to the green room. One day it was John Kerry, and I had to bring him to the green room and bring him his coffee. And like one day it was Eva Longoria. So like you just don't know, and it was interesting. And then I also interned at 60 Minutes at CBS, which again was like that same foot in the door because it wasn't my first time walking through the doors of that broadcast center. It wasn't my first time like working at that network and understanding like what the values are. But again, after I graduated, right before I started graduating from college, I kept in touch with my friends at NYC Media, which is the mayor's office. And they had said, we have this temporary summer position. It's a media manager role. It's just ingesting it's just ingesting footage that we shot for this new season we're doing. So you'll just be like receiving SD cards and you just have to keep them all logged so that the editors can access them. You'll be like the person who knows where all the footage is. Will you take it? I was like, yeah, it's a job. Like it has to do somewhat with media and journalism, so I'll take it. Eventually it became, I was like sending story ideas. And then I started doing research for a completely different project. And soon, like I was about to graduate and they were like, well, why don't you just join us full time? Like you're already involved in 3 different projects. You're already like actively doing research for this thing. Like we don't know if you leave tomorrow, like we don't know that we'll be able to find this footage, so just stay. So I stayed. So again, like the internships are really worth their weight in gold. And try them. It's also good for you because if you like follow a news reporter around and you realize you hate it, that's also information you need to know before you commit your life to doing it, right? And then you spend all these years trying to make it at like a big station, and then you realize this is really not for you. It's too stressful, too many mean emails. It's not for you. You don't like it, and that's also really worth knowing. Any other questions?
I was gonna ask what a typical day is like when there's not a breaking news story.
Yes.
Do you like spend more time in the office or on the road looking for another story? Or you have like working at CBS, you have people who do look for the story for you. So what do you do for the entire day?
So in the morning we have an editorial meeting. It's usually pretty early in the morning, around 8:45, sometimes 9 o'clock. And it's basically a time when the entire team, the assignment editors who are looking for the stories, the producers and the reporters all get together and brainstorm ideas. And one thing you really want to bring to the table is as many story pitches as possible. Like someone emailed me that there's a huge problem with traffic on their street and that people can't get through to their streets because these massive trucks are unloading Mitsubishis in front of this really narrow, very small one-way street. That's a story. It's a good community story. It's not a breaking news story. And if breaking news happens, that'll be the first story that gets cut. But it's a story idea that, again, like quality of life issues, concerns, because like this could be a Department of Transportation thing that, you know, they need to address because someone could get hurt, or people can't access their street. Like that sucks. You know, so you're sending your story pitches at the beginning of the day, and you're like, here's a couple of things I could work on today, this, and this, and then it gets discussed in the meeting. And so they're like, well, we really like this idea about drowning prevention because we're coming up on Memorial Day, and it's like the unofficial start to the beach and pool season, and it turns out Brooklyn has one of the highest drowning rates in the city, and yeah, and so it's like a really big deal. And here's this organization that's working to teach people like techniques to prevent drowning. So that could be a story. It's not a breaking news story, but it's a good story. So you always have to come with ideas. They could be really far-fetched, like, and they might not like those ideas, but bring your ideas to the table because you'll, like that Gowanus story, like if I brought that to them and I was like, I'm gonna go paddle canoes with people who are flying pride flags, like it's a strange idea, but they really liked it. So again, like, just bring a bunch of ideas to the table, and then they'll kind of get an idea of what the mix is for the day, and they're like, actually, we really like that story. We have a lot of breaking news and hard crime news, but we don't have as much like community stories or stories that profile any specific group, and it's Pride Month, so yeah, go for it. So I generally have an idea of what I'm working on early enough in the day that I can start calling people and setting up interviews, that I can drive there, do the interviews, write the story. And then we have another meeting in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. And that's when the producers go through the shows, because the show is at 5 and 6 o'clock. The producers go through the shows and they're like, well, first in the show we have this Trump indictment. And then the next story in our show is this garage collapse in Manhattan. I don't know if you guys have been watching. There was a huge garage collapse. Yeah. And then the third story on our list is, you know, like this massive flood in New Jersey where there's a water main break. But then like later in the show, we have this voting block, the AAPI voting block story that I was telling you about. And it's not breaking news, but it's definitely a good story. So you have an idea of like where in the show, how the show's structured, like what the biggest story of the day is, what your deadline is, because if I know that my story doesn't air until like 5:30 or 6 o'clock, if it's like 4 o'clock, I'm not going to be going crazy, like writing it super fast to try to get it out. I know I have a little bit more time to think about the way I want to write it and to think about the way I want to edit it, if that makes sense. So you have an idea of what you're working on early in the day, and that can change at any time. Yes?
How do you deal with the stressful parts of your job? How do you deal with it?
Well, like I mentioned, when I come home, I try to kind of leave everything at the door. I watch a lot of news in general, but I try not to on the weekends. I try not to let, like, you know, people will send mean emails sometimes, and that's okay. Like, not everyone has to like the way that you do your job. Not everyone has to be a fan. Like, yeah, people send mean emails, or like people will sometimes send story ideas that aren't really great story ideas, and they'll kind of demand that you do those story ideas, but they're just not great story ideas. So you have to just learn how to kind of gently tell people thank you, but no thank you. Things like that get stressful, but again, you just have to remember the bigger picture, that you went into this business because you love it and because you wanted to. And then there are going to be some really good days, and then there are going to be some tough days. Like with any job, right? A doctor's job is the same, you know? Yes? Oh, perks?
Yeah, I was just thinking, any perks, like, randomly that you would say while working here that you experienced, like, you know?
Yeah, well, I guess a perk that at least it's a perk for me, is that no 2 days are alike, so it doesn't get boring. Perk is sometimes you get really fun assignments, like ice skating in Central Park. Like, who gets to say that they get to spend the day doing that? You know what I mean? Like, perks like that. Sometimes interviewing celebrities is a perk. Yeah, if you really like them, I guess it depends. I'll tell you, I'm surprised that no one has asked this yet, because I get asked this almost any time I kind of speak at a school, is the salary range. And the range is like really, really big. I mean, if you're starting in a small market, in like market 200 in Montana, you're going to be making barely enough to survive. Also, cost of living there is a lot lower. You'll be making like $25,000 a year for your first contract. But the good news, like it's really bad in terms of beginning salary. But as you kind of work your way through the business and like, you know, you move on and you move on and you move on, things get a lot better. And then it gets into close to six figures. And then the cool thing is that there isn't really a cap. Like when you become a really well-established journalist, like you'll be in demand and you'll be able to make a very decent living. So it's a patience thing, and like maybe it's not for you. Like maybe you don't want to start off in college, after college making $23,000 a year, and that's totally fair. Totally fair, like I get it. But it gets better with time, a lot better.
I just want to say, Hannah, you're so fascinating. And
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to add, if you guys want to contact me, if you have questions or like you feel like you didn't have a chance to ask something, happy to leave you my email address. So you can send me an email and I'll try to get back to you as transparently as I can. So if you, I don't know if I should put it up on the screen or if I should just write it down somewhere and everyone can take a picture, but I'm happy to leave my email address.
There was just one more quick question. I'm so sorry.
Sure.
But just while the students are here, you said that this is not for everyone. So
Yeah.
what are the traits or skills you think someone should have to be successful in this role?
Right. I think that the number one thing that like people think about this business is like, oh, I get to be on TV. I think that's really should be the last of the priority. It's really like so much of this business is just not about you. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're on TV at the end of the day, like doing your little thing on camera, but it's about the people you're covering. I think some of the traits, you have to be curious and you have to be open to speaking with people that on a personal level, maybe you don't always agree with. You have to really like to write. You have to really like to read. You have to be able to work really well under pressure. That's something that's huge. Like if you are the type of person who like does not handle pressure well or tight deadlines, maybe it's not the best fit. You have to be able to work as a team. Because a lot of the time you are working with a photographer and an editor and a producer and an executive producer and an assignment editor, and you just have to be, you know, like not just a team player, but also polite and efficient under pressure. And like just really be curious. Like don't be afraid to pivot at the last minute, and don't be afraid of a change of plans. Like change of plans is what this business is about. You'll start your day going ice skating in Central Park and you'll end at a garage collapse. It's just the business, and that's okay. But you have to understand that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.